Hey guys, Cribbin Governor from the Gut Health Gurus podcast. I've got a background in food science, and today I have an amazing guest, Martha Carlin. Martha and I connected on LinkedIn many years ago, and finally, I have had the opportunity and being completely blessed to have her onto the podcast. Martha, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I've followed you over the years, and we've kind of touched on each other's things we've been doing through social media and stuff, but it's great to be sitting here with you for the first time.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to let you know, your company, the Bio Collective, was the first fecal sample I ever sent of myself many years ago. So that was, I can't even remember the year, but that was the first data I ever managed to get on myself. So thank you so much for providing that amazing service.
Did you send it from Australia?
I did. It cost
Wow.
it cost an absolute fortune at the time, but I was just so fascinated by the microbiome world that I had to get some sort of data on myself. So, and another interesting side note, this is when I found Kefir organisms in my stool as well. It was Lactobacillus Kefir actually picked up in your stool testing.
Oh, interesting. I've had different people. We had this one woman who we found the sour beer starters in hers, and it was so funny because she's like, "Oh, I used to love sour beer, and she hadn't had it in years, but it had colonized her." So,
there you go. Fascinating. And what I like to do at the start of my podcast is just to get it directly from the guest. Very open question. Who is Martha Carlin?
Oh, wow. I think first and foremost, I would say nowadays, I'm a citizen scientist, and I came to that through, trying to, sorry, I thought I'd turn my phone off. I came to that really 20 years ago when my 44-year-old husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I took my business background. So I was trained in accounting as my undergraduate degree, which is a system that's got a balance. And then I came out and went to work as an auditor for Arthur Andersen. So never take anything at face value, always examine the evidence. They also trained us in systems thinking and how to look at a system or look at the systems in a business and look for the breakpoints. And so when John was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I was like, I think this is a systems problem. And so I started to kind of relearn science, because the last time I had science was in high school, and kind of went along the way. And then in 2014, came across Martin Blazer's work, Missing Microbes, and it was such a eureka moment for me. I was like, this is it. The gut is the general ledger of the body. And so that has really consumed my life since 2014. Went on to found the Bio Collective and start the Biotiquest brand. And but I'm also, a wife, a mother, a farmer, and just a citizen of the world trying to make a difference.
That is an amazing backstory, because we all fall into this space from so many different avenues of life. And I've never come across someone that comes in from almost an accounting, auditing field, and then applies the knowledge and the methodology of auditing, and then bringing that into a scientific field like the microbiome. That is the beauty of humanity, because we come in from so many different angles, and then your perception and your point of view is then slightly different from someone else, but we all add so much value. So that's wanted to commend you on that. That's amazing. How about we delve, when you mentioned the age 44, that kind of hit home for me, because that's around my age. Yeah, how about we delve a little bit into your backstory? Because I think you also did a TED talk on this subject. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more because I think the audience would really appreciate your journey.
Sure. So in 2000, it was 2002, my husband was 44 and he had a bit of a tremor in his pinky, and I had noticed actually his loss of facial expression because he had always had a very lively, vibrant face, big smile, and he all of a sudden had flat expression. And I happened to pick up Michael J. Fox's book, Lucky Man, I think was the one that was out then. And I read it and I thought, I think maybe he has Parkinson's. And so we actually went to the neurologist and we went to his internist and he went through all these tests and everything. And the internist came back and said, oh, everything's fine. And we're sitting there in his office. And I said, well, like, what about his shaking pinky? And what about his loss of facial expression? And of course, doctors nowadays, they haven't known us our whole lives. They don't have enough time to spend with us to know that now we have a flat facial expression. And so as soon as I said that, I could see the expression on his face, and he said, I think maybe we need to send you to a neurologist. But when we went to the neurologist, just watching my husband walk down the hall, when we walked into his office and sat down, he turned to me and said, you know what I'm going to tell you, don't you? And of course I did. I mean, neurologists are notoriously blunt and unkind. And so we came out of that, he's like, here's a pill, there's nothing you can do about it, you're just going to get worse. And I am a fixer. I have been a fixer my whole life. I'm a business turnaround person, and I came home and I'm like, I'm not taking this laying down. And I started doing research, and I just instinctively, very intuitively knew that food was a big part of the problem. Didn't know anything about the microbiome, but I'm like, okay, well, what you're putting in this pipe, like, that's going to be the biggest problem. So I threw everything out of the cabinet. But in 2002, there really wasn't a lot of organic food. So I started researching, okay, well, what is the food supply that we have? And that's actually when I was shocked and surprised at how many chemicals were used on our food, how much genetic engineering was already going on in the food supply. And, I didn't know anything about that, but then I started studying all these little pieces. And in my head, I'm thinking, there's got to be some way to tie all these pieces together, all along the way as I'm studying Parkinson's proteins, or, and people with Parkinson's it's like a designer disease. This person over here has these 3 symptoms. This one over here has 5 symptoms, and they only share 1 symptom. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And, so changing the food was really interesting, because by going as much organic as possible and home cooking the meals, he was getting more nutrient dense, and less chemicals, preservatives, all of that. And his tremor went away. And so he's never really had much tremor since we made those changes. But over the years, he's had, different sort of ups and downs. And when the microbiome came along, I mean, we've done over 150 whole genome samples of John's stool.
Wow.
Like we have so much data on him. But, when I first started looking at it, I didn't know what these things were. And so I'm just looking through the literature, trying to figure out, well, what does this bug do? And what does this bug? And back then, even in like 2015, when we were doing his stuff at the University of Chicago, there wasn't, there's so many more publications now on all these gut microbes, but I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at what are the acute symptoms if you have an infection with this. And I'm like, all these little pieces sort of tie into what's going on with people with Parkinson's in this designer. So I'm like, I think this, the microbiome really could be the key. And so we started focusing even more on the diet. One of the things I had a huge focus on, probably starting in, I'd say maybe 2006 or 2007, was exposure to glyphosate. And really looking at that. And so really started focusing more on where were the other places of glyphosate exposure that I hadn't been in, getting them off wheat, getting them off sugar, getting them off, really shifting the microbiome. But that in 2016, which was like 2 years into founding the company, I went to a Parkinson's conference. And that was, there was a group there that was showing that the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins in a Parkinson's mouse model and actually pull the aggregates out of the brain. Wow. And I was like, wow, that's pretty remarkable. So I came back from the meeting and I bought this little book on mannitol chemistry. And I was like, wow, this is like one of the most amazing molecules. I think, like, read about it. It's amazing. It's a free radical scavenger. I mean, it probably depletes deuterium when it comes out of the, it does all these amazing things. And they use it in medicine for all different things. And people with Parkinson's definitely have osmotic stress in the body. They have about 70% have severe constipation, and mannitol can help with that. But anyway, the first chapter of the book had a discussion of the microbes that make mannitol. Most microbes use it, but there's a handful that actually make it. And that's where I kind of first started coming up with the idea of, can we like put back a system in the gut that would make this so you have a little factory? And one of my advisors, Steve Cosme, had been in the nutraceutical business and probiotics with nutraceutics that was sold to Probi. And we sat down and kind of put together the concept of the formula, and he was able to help us prototype it basically in about 2 months. And John started taking it, and we're measuring his samples, and we can see he's moving back closer and closer to the healthy human microbiome. But even more remarkable, at the time he was having to walk with a cane, he was really having posture instability, and it just poof, he was not walking with a cane in about a month. So, and then we went on from there to develop computational models to prove out that what we had come up with really worked to do what it did. And then we did before and after tests on other people from John, and we took that concept and that computational model and built these other working systems of probiotics.
I was just going to ask, I'm fascinated to hear, how's he going now?
He is doing really well. So at that point, so there's something called the UPDR score, which is how they score how advanced your Parkinson's is. And the higher the number, the more advanced your disease is. Well, in 2017 was his highest score. It was a 35. And he started taking the probiotic. And we also found an intracellular parasite in his samples, and he was treated for the parasite. After we did all the probiotic testing, we found the parasite. We treated him with an antibiotic. We saw we had totally wiped out everything we had done to improve his microbiome. And we actually did a fecal transplant. And what was interesting there is the fecal transplant bounced him back to where he was after 6 months of the probiotic. So it just worked much faster. But at the end of 2021, he got COVID, and he had a really, really tough bout of it, and about 7 months of lingering long COVID symptoms with the blood pressure issues, just the whole adrenal, HPA axis was just a train wreck. And so we really focused intensely on some interventions there. And one actually came from one of my customers who told me she had a neighbor who developed severe Parkinson-like symptoms after having COVID. And she made a yogurt with my Sugar Shift capsules. And she started with 10 capsules. So, and fermented for 36 hours. So she probably ended up with like 800 billion or a trillion CFUs. So a really high count. And she made that for him every week for a month. And he had a half a cup a day or a quarter cup a day or something. And his symptoms all reversed. So when she told me that, I actually started making the yogurt for John. And so kind of long story short, he's kind of bounced back from the long COVID symptoms and is, back on track. But he had a rough year as he was kind of coming back around from that. And there are, there's some microbiome papers that have been published showing people who have worse outcomes with COVID have low bifidobacteria. And in our Parkinson's data, we showed that they had low bifidobacteria, or they only had one or mostly one strain that was Bifido-animalis, which is different. It's quite different than the other Bifido strains. And but there have been some other Parkinson's meta-analysis that showed that Bifido was higher. So I'm kind of interested in talking to some of the people who did the meta-analysis, because that's not what we saw in our microbiome, our Parkinson's data set.
That's an amazing story, because out of necessity from having a loved one that's ill and not having necessarily the right treatment options to help that condition, it's almost you turned into a MacGyver in trying to find a solution. And then you created this amazing company called the Bio Collective, and then from that, trying to help your husband even further, then you created this wonderful probiotic range in Biotiquest and Sugar Shift, which I use myself. I love the product. I definitely think it helps me keep a lot of fat away. I don't know how it works. I was going to ask you a little bit more. Let's dig into that a little bit deeper. But a couple of side note questions that I had from your story. Firstly, I'm fascinated to hear more about the deuterium depletion aspect of the mannitol mechanism that you were speaking about. So just in layman's terms, if you could just explain that a little bit further.
So, for listeners who may not know what deuterium is, it's heavy hydrogen. And so it can sort of muck up the cellular machinery or make the mitochondria, because the hydrogen versus a deuterium is heavier and it won't move through the reactions as quickly. Well, so mannitol is a 6-carbon sugar. It's a free radical scavenger, so it's picking up hydrogens and when the microbes are making it, they're making those molecules. And then you are eliminating the mannitol. So humans don't use mannitol. We take it in, it goes back out. And so it's either going out in your urine or your stool. And so, the microbes are making mannitol from glucose and fructose and picking up 6 deuteriums and taking them out. So I actually had a conversation with Laszlo Boros, who's one of the kind of people who talks about that. He's supposed to be writing a paper for me on that mechanism. But our last conversation with that was before COVID, and a lot has changed in those 2 years. So I actually need to follow up with him on that. Getting that paper done. But I think that it is potentially one of the mechanisms. And I listened to a talk with Stephanie Seneff, kind of connecting the dots with deuterium and microbes and glyphosate and all the kind of complex pieces of that puzzle. One of the other things that is this is not one of the mannitol producing microbes, but we have a Lactobacillus plantarum that is ours. We found it from fermentation of wild fruits from in my neighborhood in Colorado, and elderberries, and it breaks down glyphosate. There are 3 pathways that break down glyphosate. One, it breaks it down to AMPA, which is more toxic. And the other 2, one's called the 3rd pathway and one's called the sarcosine pathway. And our microbe has both of those, and it breaks it down to phosphate and water. So
that's incredible.
I think that's another mechanism.
Incredible. Just as a side note as well, I interviewed Dr. Jack Cruz quite a few years ago, and he was the first guy that started to talk a bit about how microbes use deuterium. So it's so essentially in their growth pathways, just like a baby uses a lot of deuterium during that growth phase. So it's so good to hear that the science is advancing to a point now that we're actually understanding how these microbes use it and how they potentially eliminate excess deuterium from the body as well. So I'll be waiting with much eagerness to see this paper from Laszlo Boros, who's also been on this podcast. So people can go back and check out the episodes with Dr. Laszlo Boros, Dr. Gabor Shomliai, and also Dr. Jack Cruz to learn more about this subject. And then the next thing that piqued my interest when you mentioned the yogurt. So is that yogurt that you were making, because your Sugar Shift product does have Lactobacillus reuteri, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So it's like the Dr. William
Dr.
Davis
yes.
Yogurt. So yours is like the next iteration of Dr. Davis's yogurt that's a bit more specific to your problems that you're trying to fix.
Yes, and actually, I mean, the idea for the yogurt came from Dr. Davis. I mean, Dr. Davis has been really fantastic to us because you know, he knows so much about the microbiome, and he has been great with his people, you know, having us on to talk about the product, and a lot of his people take it and use it and make the yogurt. So it was one of his people who told me about helping her neighbor, because it was her idea she goes, okay, well, we make the reuteri yogurt. Let's, you know, she made this for her husband with Parkinson's, and he's got symptoms kind of like Parkinson's. So I'm going to make yogurt with so then it was kind of like, wonderful.
That's so interesting. So you're probably very well-versed at talking this. So a lot of people might be wondering, what's the difference between taking the capsule versus making a yogurt out of the product? Is there any benefits or good causes, good reasons to use this methodology?
Well, I do think there are some reasons to use the yogurt methodology, because there are a lot of bioactive peptides in milk, and we make the yogurt with a high fat. So I'll either make it with organic whole cream, grass-fed, or grass-fed organic half and half. So it's a very high fat content. And I think what it's doing is making the minerals and the you know, the vitamins and everything more bioavailable than just, I mean, I think the capsules are great, and I have wonderful you know, testimonials from people who take the capsules. It changes their energy. We have people who report weight loss, but we do not advertise weight loss. And it's mostly because they are able to do a longer intermittent fast, or they just don't get as hungry. They don't crave sugars. You know, there are a lot of different mechanisms behind that. But I think the yogurt, one, you're getting a very high count. So you're doubling about every 12 hours. So, you know, our label on the bottle says 18 billion, but you know, it's probably closer to 25. And you know, I started with 4 capsules, so that's 100 billion, and you double that for, you know, it's 800 billion. Is that right? Yeah. Or And so when she was starting with 10 capsules, she was getting a lot. So, if you're really looking for some, I guess I would say, intense bioremediation and cleanup, the yogurt's probably a great idea, and you're going to get, you're going to get a lot more bioactive compounds in the yogurt. I don't know. And I don't know if you've ever seen this book. It's called The Life Bridge. I said, I'm going to sell out because it's out of print, but I talked about it in Dr. Davis's group, and they were all out buying it on Amazon. But it's The Life Bridge, the way to longevity with probiotic nutrients. And they go through in here and really show how microbes make inorganic matter living and much more bioavailable. So a USP nutrient that you're buying in a bottle versus one that is, fermented and provided in, the nutritional yeast. You don't want to get the fortified stuff. You want to get unfortified. But a yeast like that, or a microbial blend, like we put together a blend, and they're making and using metabolites, you're going to get those compounds in a much more accessible way for your body. And that book was just a real aha for me. And then it has like 10 pages of the fermented foods around the world and what strains of bacteria are in them. And of course, that was a eureka for me, because I found this book after I had made my formula. And 3 of the key strains in my formula are found in global fermented foods around the globe, but not so much probiotics.
Amazing. That's incredible. And I think just a side note there, I can definitely back up your comment on the bioavailable peptides, because I've done a lot of work on kefir, and a lot of the benefits from milk kefir come from the conversion of these milk proteins into all these extremely bioactive and bioavailable peptides. So your comments on making that reuteri yogurt is so apt, because firstly, as you mentioned, the higher effective dose level, but then also the pre-fermentation of the milk peptides into all these potentially beneficial active agents. So that's incredible. Thank you for your insight. And if anybody wants to learn more about the yogurt process, you can go back to, I think it's the previous episode where I talked to Dr. William Davis on all these very interesting aspects. So let's move on. So I'm really interested in your biocollective work, because you have potentially access to incredible amounts of data on the microbiome, perhaps one of the most in the whole entire world. I myself, with my research as well through a little microbiome, have a lot of data on the microbiome. Admittedly, I haven't advanced as much as you guys in terms of the machine learning and the artificial intelligence side to extract more insights out of that data set. But how about, just very quickly in a nutshell, if you could just tell us about three of the top learnings from getting all this data from thousands and thousands of people. What's your 3 takeaways? Your elevator pitch for your data?
Well, probably one of the things that it was an original hypothesis of ours, and it held up pretty well, is that we call these things diseases and put them in these singular categories, but really what we have is metabolic dysfunction kind of across the spectrum. And so maybe where your different weak spots are, it pops out as a different sort of disease classification. But much of it is in this dysregulation of lipids and sugars in the body. And so that was a big epiphany for me. I continue to have kind of eureka moments with the Parkinson's data. because we have made that data and those samples available. We gave a set of the Parkinson's samples to Circus Massmanian at Caltech, and they published a really interesting paper on it. We took our whole genome data and worked with Artigen, a company in Poland, and they applied their machine learning and came back with all these incredible insights, potential biomarkers. And I continue to sort of send those out to Parkinson's researchers who can do something. I mean, that's not what we do. I'm kind of an explorer, but not the exploiter, I guess. But so there have been some interesting insights there that go back to mycobacteria, actually, which has been an area of interest of mine for probably 2 years into the BioCollective, because some papers came out with some potential connections to Parkinson's, and I started looking at sequencing, and it's actually an organism that's very hard to get because it's low abundance in the microbiome. It is difficult to lyse, so it often gets missed. And then we actually just published a paper on sample collection methods and how it biases the data. And when you're using a DNA RNA preservative or freezing, you have a significant impact on proteobacteria and actinobacteria. And those are two key things in disease, I believe.
Absolutely. It's your Bolophila or your what's another desulfur Vibrio that often shows up in stool tests.
They actually just came out. I think it was Finnish researchers that came out and with the hypothesis that desulfovibrio may be a cause of Parkinson's. Oh, wow. And that's interesting too, because Stephanie Seneff has showed this sulfur dysregulation with glyphosate, but there's also published literature, at least here in the States, of desulfovibrio in the public water systems, in the pipes, and it's also pretty prevalent in the CAFO, the big agricultural waste operations. So, there's some potential there from what we've done environmentally.
Wow, that's so fascinating. That's incredible. I might have to just jump back out because I think our time's going to run out on Zoom, and I'll just send you another link. And then if you wouldn't mind, we continue a little bit longer.
That's fine. Yeah,
cool. That's fine. So Zoom's going to kick us out in a minute. So what we can do
is... that too, because you hit your 45 minutes and you have to go.
It's incredible.
Okay, so I'll check my email or?
Yeah. Yep. I'll send you a link shortly. Cool. See you soon.
In a minute.